So thank you very much for the kind introduction there, General Hammond. So I have about 20 minutes of prepared remarks, which I hope will spark a lot of conversation and questions. And I want to start by saying how honored I am to come and speak with you today. And as always, AUSA does tremendous work on behalf of our soldiers and the institution of the honor on the Army. And it's my honor to be with you here today as we take on the subject as timely and complex as the implications of cyberspace on our force. Now, before I begin, I just want you to know I had the opportunity to review a number of previous speeches from this Rogers Lecture Series, and they're all insightful, far-ranging, and often quite humorous at times. I'm actually an engineer. Cyberspace is a complex subject, and I've never been accused of being a stand-up comic, so we'll just see how that part goes. Writing in the Harvard International Review in 1982, General Rogers contemplated the core challenges posed by the nuclear balance between NATO and the Soviet Union, and I've taken the liberty of paraphrasing a short citation. There's been much discussion of late of NATO's strength relative to the Warsaw Pact. Exact balances are difficult to compute and affected by such factors as warning time and political decisions to mobilize. More troubling than these static ratios are the trends toward a widening imbalance of force capabilities. Perhaps most troublesome, the Soviet Union has shown its willingness and ability to use this growing military arsenal or threaten its use to reinforce its political aims. While written for the Cold War and employing the vocabulary of nuclear weapons, one could easily make the argument that these observations apply equally well today. Simply updating the primary players, replacing nuclear weapons with those resident in the cyberspace domain, and the insights and cautions of General Rogers carry the same weight today as they did nearly 4 decades ago. More importantly, they can be easily projected into the future. So substituting cyberspace terms into General Rogers' comments, I believe they would now read something like, there's been much discussion of late of America's strength in cyberspace relative to our competitors on the global stage. Exact balances are difficult to understand, much less to compute, and are affected by such factors as attribution, outdated legal norms, and the widespread availability of sophisticated cyber tools on the dark web. More troubling than these static ratios are the trends toward a widening imbalance in cyber capabilities. Perhaps most troublesome, some states and even non-state actors have shown a willingness and ability to use this emerging cyber arsenal or threaten its use to reinforce not only their political aims, but to steal intellectual property, influence public opinion, and counter the traditional military strengths of our armed forces. The world's changing, and it always has, but the advances in cyberspace are accelerating that change. This question that it poses the Army is twofold. Do we recognize the fundamental changes brought about by this constantly evolving domain? And if so, are we in a good position to adapt to them? So set the stage, let me start with the scale of the technological changes we're living through. I believe information technology is undergoing another revolution right now. Evidence in technologies such as mobile, wireless, advanced encryption, advanced computing, the Internet of Things, cloud, data technologies, the list goes on. And it's not just the technology, it's the operationalization of that technology. And the computing power is getting smaller and faster rapidly with increasing complexity. As a point of reference, the Apollo 11 spacecraft, 145,000 lines of code. In the space shuttle, 400,000 lines of code. In the Mac operating system on your laptop, 86 million lines of code. That is orders of magnitude higher, all the more impressive when you consider that Apollo 11 delivered the first humans to the moon, performing calculations today that would occupy a nominal amount of processing power of what would be a household item. And of course, this isn't a simple one-for-one comparison, but fundamentally, the computers that allowed man to walk on the moon performed calculations far less complex than the ones required to run the graphics in the game of Angry Birds on your iPhone. What a stunning advance, especially since mobile phones only came to be in 2007. Or consider your high-end car. which has up to 100 electronic control units. Many in this room remember when you could do your own repairs in your garage, swapping out a starter or gapping the spark plugs. Those days are probably gone forever. Today's cars evolved from a purely mechanical form of transportation to a mobile network on wheels. Drive-by-wire is now drive-by-code. While these results in a highly efficient and responsive vehicle, it also creates vulnerabilities that, when exploited, allow hackers to remotely control your car. Similar changes have occurred in the way we interact with one another, again, powered by technology. When was the last time anyone in this room received an actual letter in the mail from someone under the age of 30, and your kids don't count? They're just being polite. Social media has the power to connect people with so many positive benefits. And in terms of scale, every day, US-owned global media companies process 210 billion emails, 3 million images, 45 million gigabytes of data over smartphones, and 700,000 new members join the global social network on Facebook every day. The sheer magnitude of that communication has ramifications not only for the speed and frequency of interactions, but it brought with it alternative sources of information and the ability to tailor a message directed at a desired audience at 140 characters or less. No one could argue that these advances don't bring significant benefits. They connect us to one another, effectively shrinking the globe and allowing information to be shared in near real time over great distances. They increase the efficiency of our manufacturing, optimize the use of resources, and through their sheer affordability and ubiquitous nature, fundamentally change the quality of our lives. But like most technology, they can also be turned to darker purposes. In addition to cybercrime alone, consider the recent terrorist attacks in Kenya, Paris, and San Bernardino, all planned and conducted with some combination of social networks, mobile phones, and satellite imagery easily accessible over Google. Or on a larger scale, reflect on the actions of nation states such as Russia in the Crimea and the Ukraine, or China and its far-reaching program of intellectual property theft. These actions were enabled by operations in cyberspace and pose real challenges to how we think about our approach going forward. Put more clearly, the enormous leaps forward in processing power and connectivity come with transformative military impacts. Today, we can virtually deploy cyber forces anywhere in the world without leaving our headquarters. Not only can network drones perform reconnaissance, precision targeting, and deliver physical and cyber effects, but we're not far away from their ability to do this autonomously. Following the example of many big companies, the military's entry into the world of big data now permits us to capture, sift, and analyze massive amounts of data, revealing unseen patterns and providing answers to questions only limited by our ability to imagine them. Social media, as you all know, not only connects our deployed soldiers to their families, but it also maintains a persistent stare on all human activities, to include warfighting, with real impacts to both public opinion and our political leaders. Individually, from a military perspective, these technologies represent both opportunities and threats. Cumulatively, though, they require us to fundamentally consider not only how we think about the character of future wars, but the political and legal constructs we have employed to do so. General Rogers concisely captured the difficulty of quantifying the nuclear balance of Europe at a time when factors such as warning time and political will made simple static ratios meaningless. The technological revolution we're living in today demands that we as a nation engage in a similar debate. As a military, we must not only recognize the fundamental changes that cyberspace brings to warfare, but then how to best organize and equip our forces to make the best use of its enormous potential. Before we can determine whether we are postured to take the full advantage of cyberspace, it's worth asking some first-order questions about the character of warfare itself. Does a domain like cyberspace, which is inherently global, undermine the long-standing concepts that underpin our Westphalian political structure? Modern technology certainly has little respect for formal borders between nations. What's the implication for warfare if attacks in the cyberspace domain can, and often are, intentionally launched from the territory of a neutral third, fourth, or even fifth party, almost always without their knowledge? There's a concept like sovereignty, which gives states not only the ability to raise and employ armies, but also bestows formal responsibility for the acts of violence they commit, still hold. Taking it to one more level of abstraction, how do we best think about the challenges to our former reality when the information domain intrudes onto the physical domain, where the two become inseparable? Questions like these have no simple answers. Despite their difficulty, however, they determine not only the character of future warfare, but our Army's ability to prepare for it. Setting aside the political for a moment, I'd say it's fair to say that regardless of whether we continue to think about war in terms of states or boundaries or something far more nebulous, the cyberspace domain is inherently stateless and boundless in nature. It's accessible by actors of all types, from former nation states to individuals. It employs weapons that take years to develop in secret labs, alongside hacking tools available for sale on the internet. In many ways, it democratizes what was once the sole purview of states. Posturing the Army to operate in this reality does not in any way replace the physical conduct of warfare, but complicates it by adding another dimension requiring careful thought. I think our approach can be grouped into three areas: leveraging technology, managing the talent, and organizing the forces. First, leveraging technology. Consider what's being done commercially today. 3D printing is starting to come into its own. While there's still a long ways to go, the idea of locally producing parts and munitions in the battlefield is no longer a far-off dream and has potential to upend the entire global distribution system. Autonomous machines like IBM's Big Blue and the work done by DARPA with autonomous vehicles and autonomous systems offers a promise of man-machine pairing and machine-on-machine interfaces. Technology is far, far ahead of policy, law, and ethics. The Internet of Things, everything's being connected to everything else, and while it increases efficiency, it creates an ever-expanding web of sensors. I just laid out a smattering of technologies to prime the pump. The challenge is how to adapt these systems and processes. Industry has seen their potential and has moved much faster in some areas than the military services, and some of our adversaries have as well. We have to do better in this area. Just consider for a moment what's possible, and possible, what I mean is today, using current technology, not some point in the future, using things yet to be developed. Imagine, if you will, thousands of drones, nothing really more than circuit boards with wings. On each drone is a small submunition, perhaps repurposed from an existing arsenal of artillery munitions. Now connect these drones to a slightly larger command drone, capable of not only controlling the flight of this swarm, but also programmed to detect the heat signatures of enemy armored vehicles or formations. Take it one step further. The entire swarm of drones is connected on the battlefield using 3D printers at the cost of perhaps $1 million. What are the effects of unleashing this swarm of kamikaze drones on an enemy? Would it not overwhelm any air defense network designed to take out individual planes one at a time? Or consider how the tactic shifts the cost-benefit equation if even 10% of these drones strike their targets. That would be somewhere in the range of 200 precisely delivered anti-armored munitions striking vehicles that each cost more than 50 times the cost of the swarm itself. Game-changing, in my opinion, and achievable today if we simply understand what's possible. However, technology is only one driver of future war. There's a human side as well. General Rogers was well known for his work in talent management, unit cohesion, and training. And how are we doing as an Army in this area? We've made great progress in attracting talent and building up our initial capability, but now's not the time to rest on our laurels. Our personnel processes have to be adapted to reflect the unique human characteristics of cyber talent. This talent remains in high demand, takes time and sometimes years to develop, and strains against the traditional career paths our armies maintain for decades. We must be more flexible in attracting and retaining both military and civilian talent, pursuing initiatives to the creation of a cyberspace career field for civilians are the option for our very best to move between private industry and uniformed service without loss of clearances or promotion potential. Just as important, we need senior leaders who clearly understand the technology and see the future that's upon us. This cyberspace domain exists today. In many ways, the United States is responsible for its creation, going all the way back to ARPA's first foray into connecting those first two computers, which eventually exploded to become the internet. Yet for many, cyber remains something like a black art, conducted by technical wizards in dark rooms or in their parents' basement. But all of that does us a disservice. Just like General Rogers was my previous boss, much of like General Rogers previously selected and groomed the forward-thinking officers that led the Army after Vietnam, we must be seeking senior leaders flexible enough to grow with this constantly evolving domain, agile enough in their thinking to seize the opportunities it presents, and integrate them with our proven strengths and the physical demands to build a better and more capable Army. Third, we got to examine how we organize the force. Cyberspace capabilities have to be pushed into tactical formations, along with the authorities to employ select weapons under appropriate conditions. We have to push forward on the integration of electronic warfare, information operations, and cyberspace at all levels, recognizing while each represents a distinct set of tools and effects, when integrated, they are a powerful asset to our commanders. Absent changes such as these will be on the wrong side of asymmetry. We see tremendous innovation by the Russians with their combination of drones and artillery fires, or their manipulation of social media to shape public opinion. Sadly, none of what they're doing involves new technology. Instead, they just reorganized existing capabilities in a way that achieves their objectives. We see tremendous innovation by the Chinese, most clearly in their scale of global intellectual property theft. We see tremendous innovation by ISIS in the area of social media, where they've developed a virtual caliphate in cyberspace that seemed for a while almost impervious to physical attack. We need this same level of innovation and better in our own forces. Achieving this demands that we recognize the changed environment we're living in today and fundamentally rethink our reality. Our challenge is not tactical dominance on the battlefield. We've won every battle save one in the last 15 years of war. Instead, we have to break free of the constraints in our thinking and embrace the fact we have this new domain in cyberspace, a domain of great opportunity, but assaults the very foundations of our assumptions. It presents a way to deliver effects in a physical world without the constraints of deploying forces to distant land, just as it introduces vulnerabilities into our network systems and data in ways not envisioned just a few years ago. We're only limited by ourselves. In short, cyberspace doesn't replace the physical world, it complicates it. Now's the time to embrace this challenge, ensure as an Army we've thought through its implications and adapted to continue to provide the very best trained and equipped fighting force in the world. And the time to act is now. Thank you very much. I have a mic on, so I.
Thanks. Thank you very much for that overview. Just if I could take the privilege of asking the first question. The second of the three topics you talked about, the human dimension of this. So it's one thing to recruit, train a new cohort of this. What do you see are the ways that the professional development and education of those who are in service, particularly senior leaders, officer, enlisted, civilian, to operate in this in the cyber domain? How do we move forward? How did you transition from engineer to the cyber force?
Okay, so when General Odierno told me I was going to be the cyber commander, I was looking for some guidance, and he said, "It's simple. I want you to create a world-class cyber force." I didn't know what that was, so I went to school, and many of you have heard me say this in other forums, the real key to cyber is the people. And the challenge is recruiting and then retention. And so first on the recruiting side, the first thing to recognize, we're in a tremendous, I would almost call it a battle, but it's not a battle, struggle for talent. Everybody wants cyber talent. And so what does the military have that might attract? I would argue three things. One is you have the ability to do things with the military that you can't do legally on the outside. That's one. Two is you have the opportunity to work with people that are just like you. In other words, it's the team you're on. And then the last thing is you get the chance to work with some incredible technology in the defense of the United States. So that appeals to bringing people in. We're not having trouble up to this point recruiting. In fact, we normally make our recruiting in the first quarter for cyber. Some of you may wonder, like, how is that possible? It's a 6-year enlistment, no waivers. It's because, think about this when they leave, if you could write on your resume something that sounds like this. I'm a nation-state hacker with a TS polygraph clearance, right? So then the challenge is, how do you keep them in? And so I think that cyber is driven by a framework that I use from Simon Sinek, and it's about purpose, mastery, and autonomy. So let me first talk purpose. They want to know what they're doing is important. It has to be important. Mission. Second thing is, they want to be known for what they're doing. I often describe, if you take true cyber warrior and you put $1 million here, and you said you could be known for finding this zero-day exploit or hacking this thing or something over here, every time they'll go over here. They want to be known in the community, and they all want to be known for doing things. They can make money. Now, they have to make a certain level of money, and that's not a private's pay, but they're not driven by money. They're actually driven by, I believe, purpose, mastery, and then the last piece is autonomy. Autonomy is, once given the task, they want to be left alone. Even when I talk to my friends in the tech areas around the country, managing these people, managing humans, they actually have a book like this, Managing Humans, is one of the biggest troubles. And often the role of the leader is to keep kind of the struggles off the team that's working on the problem. And so I think if we do both of those, that will help. As for developing our leaders, I think what's about halfway through my command, General Ordiano asked me a question. He said, it's great what you're doing for Cybercom. It's great what you're doing for the national defense. What are you doing for the Army? And that really, actually I said, I need 6 months. Give me 6 months, I'll come back to you with a plan. And since then, we've run a series of experiments. Those experiments in just showing people what's possible, working with both special operations and with ground forces, all of a sudden they're like, we need more of this. What's interesting is the first one, we didn't spend a lot of time integrating with the forces, with the formations. Now we work all the way from the brigade commander on down. The captains really get this stuff. They say, yeah, I need you to do this, and when I'm here, if you see this, I want all the communications down and this here, and those soldiers can deliver that. So it's really lashing up those capabilities with them. As we're able to scale that, I think we'll get more. Right now, those forces are actually coming out of other forces, and so we're not sure. I describe it as a pilot to inform what the structure will eventually need to look like for this. Yes, sir. 1, and then 2.
Sir, Tim Muchmore, a long time no see.
Good to see you.
So we're building a lot of cyber teams across the Army, and you talked about the unique skills and motivations these kids have, but we seem to be trying to fit them into the military uniform as opposed to relying on a different kind of civilian. Is there a difference between what somebody in uniform can do cyber-wise versus what a civilian can do cyber-wise? Are there restrictions that you have to be in uniform to initiate an attack in cyber?
So this is a fundamental heart of the debate when Cyber Command was stood up, and that is, so right now the forces are roughly 80% military, 20% civilian. I think we always need a civilian mix. But the idea is, we haven't asked civilians to conduct warfare on behalf of the United States. That's the role of soldiers. This is the debate, right? And so right now that hasn't really come to the fore because the teams are the way they are, but it's coming, right? It's about who does this and what does that look like? These teams, I guess the way I would say it is, first off, this comes up quite often about, this goes to the larger question, right? Do you want warfare conducted by civilians? And some people say, we have civilian control of the military, right, but we don't put civilians in tanks. There's also this misnomer, though, that, oh, you have to have people that can't fit into the military standards. Well, when I talked about the recruiting, remember what I said, no waivers? We actually had one of our cyber lieutenants say, I'm in, all you have to do is send me to Ranger School, and I'm in, I'm good, I'm in for 5 more years. I mean, you wouldn't think that, right? And I don't know if you're noticing this in in the gaming world, but you know, a lot of these high-end gamers that make money off games, they're hiring like life coaches and fitness coaches and nutrition coaches and all this because they've recognized, wait a minute, that it's growing. I have to be in shape to have the stamina to win these games. And so this whole thing, it's changing, right? And go back to now, right? You're dealing with a thing of like mission, purpose, mastery. Once they get focused, that's why people talk about all this Red Bull. Once they're focused on a mission, right? That Red Bull is all about keeping them focused on the mission, but after a while, they get smarter on this. And we had 4 lieutenants do a very interesting project. They loved it. They had 30 days to do it. It was really, really difficult. They got mastery out of this, and you know, they're well known inside their community. And one of those lieutenants, who will never command a company, but is absolutely brilliant. How brilliant? You know when you get the little squiggles on your line like it's machine code? Take machine code to 1s and 0s. That's what this officer can do. Okay, it's incredible. You know, he's like, I just want to work on these kind of problems for the rest of my life. I'm in, I just want to work on these. I don't want to do anything else though. And see, that's a different kind of challenge for us. How do we manage that? And so, I guess I'll leave it there, Tim, so thanks.
Sir, Colonel, retired Navy, former signal officer. You talked about technology being ahead of policy law. So when President-elect Trump calls you to his office, what are you going to tell him to change policy law?
So I've talked to the whole American Bar Association National Security Law just a couple weeks ago. And the problem to me with cyber right now is all cyber law is based on 18th, 19th, 20th century law. In other words, we took laws that were already there and we said, we're going to adapt this to cyber. And what's happening is it's crushing on its own weight. It just doesn't work. And so you end up with these insane arguments. And when you're looking at it, it's like, you know, if we had a blank piece of paper, would we be doing it this way? And I think the answer is no. And I think we need a comprehensive cyber strategy. And this is not just a problem in the military, it's a problem in the civilian side. I mean, information sharing was all written around liability laws. That's why there were no that's why there was no sharing for a long time, because if you acknowledge that you had a problem, which by the way, when you have a problem, probably everybody else has it too. You just might be the first one to notice it. The Verizon breach report, you know, average time of discovery when you've been breached is like 200 days, right? But they don't share the information because then they're liable. And what started changing this was Target, when the CEO and the CISO were both fired. And then now cyber has the attention of the boardrooms. And talking to one of my friends who works with the board of the New York Stock Exchange and a lot of companies, she said, you know, that is absolutely the subject about how to measure our risk right now. That is the area that we have to work on.
And I kind of want to, our next area, G4 Army, I kind of want to play on that question a little bit. Do you see a future where we may have to enter as nation states into treaties with other nations? And where I want to kind of go with that is right now, early cyber, we're talking, you know, breach of system, data collection, denial of service. But I think, you know, if you read open source about Iranian centrifuges, Stuxnet, you know, we can get, we being cyber, generically kinetic effects, or what used to have been only done with kinetic effects. Real world destruction, and as you were saying, we're starting to wire our equipment. And as we wire our equipment, whether it be a car or an airline, we create vulnerabilities. And it is a brave new world, like you said.
So let me answer this a little different way. So I went to the DARPA Grand Challenge this year. In the DARPA Grand Challenge this year, there's a very famous hacking game called Capture the Flag. Basically, it's 2 teams. You have to be both good in offense and defense. You have to protect your flag, that's the defensive side, and you have to be able to develop weapons to capture the other guy's flag in cyber, that's the offensive side. The big idea, can machines do it? Now, this was held in conjunction with Black Hat Convention in Las Vegas. I went to the Paris Hotel, just being an engineer, just bear with me. How much chilled water do you have? 5%. There were trucks with chillers, big flatbed trucks out there, and they punched 4-inch pipes through the wall of the Paris Hotel to the stage to chill these supercomputers. How much power do you have? Entire power was rerouted from the Las Vegas Convention Center. Can you imagine this? Into the Paris Hotel to power 7 supercomputers on stage. Grand theater, as you can imagine. And you can imagine you're doing this at the hacker convention, right? So it's even more stunning. And those machines played 96 rounds. The machine that won actually crashed, rebooted itself, and still won. It was so far ahead. Think about the implications of everything I said. That means they loaded up the machine. The problems that they were facing were not little simple things. It was Morris worm, heartbleed, shell shock, all these tough ones that hadn't been broken yet. The machines actually solved a problem that had not yet been solved. This is here now. They made these machines, 7 teams. Everybody's watching this. I'm like, I want one of these, right? but the to experiment with, but where I'm going with you, that's machines working on machines. Go back to your question. What's the rules on this? Because a lot of us are like, wow, what's that doing for the defense? But for a guy like me, what's that doing for the offense? These machines built weapons, and they launched them based on algorithms that we programmed. What's the rules on this? Right? And when you think about it, this is moving really fast. And where I come on your part now think what I just said about the big data. I guarantee right now, Facebook, Google, all of them are building machines like this to protect their networks. Because now we've reached the point where, in the math world, it would be n equals all. Collect all the data, and then we will analyze it. When you start doing that, it's going to become much harder to hide. When it becomes much harder to hide, adversaries adapt. So what I keep saying, cyber is going to look very different 3-4 years from now than it does today. We're not there yet, but as this defense gets stronger as a result of this, the offense is going to change. And I don't know what that's going to look like.
I just, because I agree, reading aviation, I think we're like in 1909, 1911. We've got this aeroplane, we're not quite sure what we're supposed to do with it. But where this thing's going to go in the future is incredible.
So I've thought about this, but the challenge I have with the aviation methodology is you could take a biplane pilot and show them an F-35, and they could recognize it. I'm not sure you can take cyber in 1910 and go 100 years out. I'm not sure we're going to see it. I mean, Google announced today they're starting up their autonomous car company. They announced it today. I mean, we did that, right? That was a DARPA Grand Challenge about 7 years ago. Here's my question, kind of going play back to the logistics. So we saw its potential. We put it on DARPA. Have you seen yet a single convoy at the National Training Center that's working autonomously? No. And that's my point. I mean, it's moving so fast in my mind. Last thing here, and then I'll take your question. The command that I stood up here, it grew 100% a year. I mean, on real scale, including the teams. I sort of got used to this, but now I'm in this new job. It doesn't operate at 100%. It's actually a huge adjustment for me.
Bill Crowder from LMI, sir. You've painted a picture of how fast things are moving. So how do we think this through in the acquisition world and what I affectionately call the slide 2 problem? Slide 1 is, hi, I'm Bill Crowder, I'm briefing you on this technology. Slide 2 is, we're the military, we're different, we can't use commercial. Slide 3 is all the reasons I now want to go develop my own. How do we break that paradigm and start to take advantage of what you just described in the acquisition community?
Yeah, so for me, for cyber, and I've spoken about this a number of times, I believe we need a whole new set of, I don't know if it's just for cyber, it might be bigger than cyber, right? But a different set of rules that allow public-private partnerships in ways that we haven't imagined. So one of the things I learned in cyber is don't constrain the high-end operators too much. Because what happens is you may think they're going to solve it this way, and in the end, it's way over here, right? But the problem we have a very deliberate requirements process in a way that almost oversubscribes it. And I'm working with, well, actually, one of my friends is Carl Schramm, who headed up the Cosman Institute, one of the global, and I was talking about innovation, and because we're working a lot with innovation in my current job, And he reminded me that there's a huge piece of innovation that I didn't talk about, which is the acquisition side. And he said, often, there's a lot of great ideas out there, Ed. The problem is the structure to build these doesn't exist yet. I mean, strained silicon graphics, which is all the chips in your phone, that took 10 years to develop. They got the idea, and it took 10 years to get the technology to actually build this stuff. And it is not a linear line like people thought. It went kind of like that and got there. Although people would describe it as, oh, they dreamed up this idea, and then they did this and this. So I think we have to harness the power of, we can't compete, and I'll just speak for the Army. So the Army's whole S&T budget was $3 billion, and you can correct me, Karen, if I'm wrong. Google's is, well, let me rephrase the ones I do. Microsoft is roughly 13, IBM between 7 and 8, Oracle 4. There's no way we can compete on the IT side. What's also funny is they said they want our problems, because our problems are also their problems. And we, I think, do a very good job of describing things in time and space and vision and the way we train. And I think this is a place that we could really marry with industry. I just don't think it's going to work with the current rules. I mean, every time I try to meet with them and have a discussion about requirements, you can just imagine the lawyers are going ballistic on this. And I have 7 of them, right? So it is, I had 7, I don't have many more, but something that we have to, that's something that I think that we have to keep work on. And this is where I go, we have to rethink the reality, right? The reality is we're thinking of a physical world, start thinking about a cyber world. And then what also prevents us from doing it? Sometimes I've wondered, what happens if we have a problem? So one of my last very quickly, one of my last tasks, I stood up and I won't go much further than this, I stood up a task force that worked counter ISIL. It's a pure offensive task force against counter ISIL. It's created separate, it was put out in the Washington Post. I kind of stopped there. But when I was looking at some of this, it's like, what if we just went out and bought this stuff off the dark web? Oh my gosh, people are like, you can't do that. I mean, you might be buying it from Russians. Okay, I mean, it's ISIS, right? It's not the Russians. But I think this is something we really gotta think our way through. By the way, when you buy stuff off the dark web, it normally comes with a guarantee.
Sir, Kevin Merrigan, General Dynamics. All right, sir. I just want to follow up on the last question, kind of from the acquisition side and requirement side. I met with Steve Fogarty yesterday, and we had a good discussion up at NSA and Cyber Command. And one of the things we're talking about is this convergence of everything. You know, RF convergence, EW convergence, cyber attack, and defense. And then you look at the platform level. You're down from the soldier level to the vehicle level to the command post, network ops, everything converging. But we're still writing requirements in every one of those stovepipes individually, and we're acquiring in those stovepipes. And you can't get 2 PEOs to sit in a room and discuss how are we going to acquire for a platform and a command post or an aircraft or anything to work together. How do we get around this?
Kevin, I don't have a good answer. I've actually considered this might be the big Manhattan project of my new job, but because that is transformational, right? But you know, I've taken a couple runs at stuff like this before, just in the cyber world. Because in the Army and cyber, we divided it across 3 PEOs. You know how hard that is for me? Because most cyber is dual use.
And add
right?
all the other services too: Navy, Air Force, Marine, SOCOM, all doing their own too.
Right. And first off, we can't afford that because a lot of us are kind of trying to build the same things.
Right.
So I don't have a good answer for you. I do know this is a big problem that has to be solved. It goes, you know, kind of what bills, but I don't, and I don't think the answer is to throw out the FAR and all that. So it's almost, I don't know, because I've watched a lot of people take runs at the acquisition system over my career with little effect, right? And so I just don't think having yet another study and doing all this, it's almost like we need a series of pilots. This is how I did everything in Army Cyber. I did everything through small pilots because they're not so threatening. And then, as I have a little saying, success has 1,000 fathers. And once you have something successful, then all of a sudden everybody thinks it's their idea, and before you know it, it explodes. It's great. I'm actually wondering if we need something like that to kind of start it. But you know, this, with Cybercom getting even more acquisition authority, I mean, this is, I've talked to Admiral Rogers about this a couple times. So we looked at SOCOM's model, but SOCOM's model, it's only partially applicable. So that's and this is all tied up in the CIO world too. This is I mean, we're not working, Secretary Fanning told me something really interesting yesterday. He said, well, Ed, one of the reasons there's all these problems inside the services because we haven't sorted this out at DoD level either. And so every service, because he's worked this problem in every service, he says, we really got to get this fixed at the DoD level. Back there, and then you, Mike.
Sir, you alluded to the flying back in the 1910s by the Wright brothers here at Fort Myer. Well, I wonder what Major General G.M. Barnes, who was head of Ordnance Research, who invested in the ENIAC, would be thinking right now.
Yeah, I do wonder that. Thank God he did. So when I was last at Google, and I'm dated on this, probably 2 years ago, I asked the lead software engineer for Google Chrome, what he thought the feature would look like in 5 years. He goes, I can't work in a 5-year increment. I can only work in a 3-year increment. Of course, I'm having this explosion because, people ask me, what do you want Army Cyber to look like 5 years from now? And even this highly successful company with 2 billion lines of code in their algorithm.
It's another example of the Army's innovation that has, the original ENIAC was put together to calculate artillery tables. So.
Yeah. Well, the Army, many of you know what the ICANN servers are? They run the basis of the internet. There's 13 of them in the world. The Army owns one of them. I didn't even know that until I was 2 years in Army Cyber. But you can actually look it up. You can see it on there. The ICANN people came to me because they had a little problem with ours and wanted me to fix it, which I didn't even know we had one. So, but it's really funny. Yes, ma'am.
Two-pronged problem or suggestion / question. In the early 70s, we had Spec 4s, 5, 6, 7, NSA. Have we considered going back to that? That's number one. Number two, I'm not so concerned about the 18 through 22. I am concerned about the lieutenant colonel up, and I'm concerned about who runs our money. The congressional side of it, the senators, the congressmen. How aware are they of the cyber problem?
So let me start with the bottom one. So huge work going on in talent management, force of the future, et cetera, and working with the G1 of the Army, Jim McConville. I mean, cyber could actually break a lot of this open. We've not looked at the Spec 4, Spec 5 stuff. So for the high-end cyber, what we have looked at is warrant officers. And in fact, to a point that if you have the right makeup, you just become a warrant officer. There's not you don't go through all this processing, right? And General McConville, we're working through that, but it's how do we manage this? Now, you still need first sergeants, you need W5s. I mean, you need people to mentor this. I believe that if we get the force of the future right, it's a 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. So we want 1/3 of the soldiers to stay, 6-year enlistments, we can manage this flow. 1/3 goes to other government agencies, right? FBI, other intel agencies, et cetera. 1/3 goes to private industry. All of them can come back, right? Right now, that doesn't exist, right? I mean, when you leave, we take away your clearance, we take away all this stuff, right? And then to come back, it takes a while. So that's one area. We're starting to get our first true cyber officers in. So we actually had a problem in the beginning when we did the branching because people were like, and I talked to these officers, and it goes something like this. Imagine that you're a really high-end cyber person, but whatever branch you're in, you're not really that good at. But you've been working on cyber for the last 4 or 5 years, and you're doing great. But when they open the VTIP up and they put them in, they're like, well, these people aren't competitive for 06 promotion. And I went to them and I said, it doesn't matter. You have to select them in. Because if not, they all know each other, right? They're going to say we missed the high-end cyber guy. It doesn't matter if he doesn't get promoted because you are not thinking like they think, right? And so we were able to do that. We actually brought people in that we knew would not get promoted. Okay, now they're going to leave on a normal timeline. We're not bending those rules, but that's going to happen. That's not going to happen in the future, though, because what's happened is it's so competitive. For the most part, their promotion rates across all cohorts is 100%. I mean, it was 1 in 7 selection rate for the soldiers. We only take in 15 officers from West Point. It's highly competitive. And so you're getting a really top cream. Your last one, though, you had one more. Congress. The Congress wants to help. They're throwing a lot of money at it. But it goes back to the question back here, right? Pretty soon we're going to be taken to task on this because money for what? Like, what do we get for this? And right now, the biggest problem to me is kind of the acquisition side. I've gone back and forth. You know, some people said the country itself needs like a Manhattan Project-like approach. Because a lot of it, and we're talking about the Army, but this is more joint than I've ever been in. I mean, all the teams are trained the same. All of our training is the same. So, you know, I have Air Force and Navy, Coast Guard. We have people from FBI and other agencies all working with us. You see a lot of this kind of progress. They know it needs more money, but now what's happened is it's Karen, you'll know this. Because cyber was getting a lot of money, what did people start doing? Everything's cyber, right? This was all cyber. And before you know it, it's like this, and now it's gone like this, and now we're having to go back and say, wait a minute, we got to rebend this. That's not cyber, that's something else. That's not cyber, that's not cyber.
Capitalistic.
Innovative. People are innovative.
Sure.
So, but so far the Congress has been supportive, but I'm not resting. That's not going to continue because they're going to want outputs, you know, and rightly so, right? And we deserve this.
Maybe two more.
Two more. One, two. Okay.
This is Director Booth Allen. I'll go back to another older analogy of Berlin Betty and Tokyo Rose. And you mentioned how soldiers are engaged with their families through Facebook and so forth. What do you think the Army's responsibilities are from a protective force to be looking at, take AUSA, make it USAA, you know, large institutions outside of government that are affecting soldiers' lives that can create risk either through social media, setting the conditions and the fake news, or attacking those kind of networks to get the soldiers and their families into direction?
Yeah. So this is. So the example I use is the Russian Army, who has rather draconian discipline and OPSEC, bed deep into their organizations, right? Were outed both in the Ukraine and in Syria by their own soldiers on Facebook. Now just think about the implications of that. To me, the problem is, and this is I'm on another project. The problem in the Army is we have a complete shadow network. And that shadow network is people's use of doing work on their personal devices. And we're doing this, not a problem in the Pentagon. Everybody in the Pentagon has a computer. But you know, when I'm commanding 2nd Infantry Division, you go down to that infantry company, there's like 5 computers, 6. There's 150 people. We have all kinds of online training. You have to use your CAT card, et cetera. You can't get on them. And so what do the people start doing? They're using the personal phones. And unless we kind of figure out now, bring your own device, all these kind of technologies, that's starting to really chip away at this. And I think the advances in virtualization are almost at the point where we're going to be able to use advanced browser technologies to be able to do this. In other words, all you're doing, you're entering through a browser. When you enter through that browser, you're in the DoD network, and when you leave the browser, the entire thing collapses. That technology is almost here. And I think when you have that, that's going to bring unbelievable security to companies as well, because then they can control that. Uber's plays with this already, right? Because Uber decided that they were not going to create their own network. They just use the internet. Think about that. They do not have a network. They just use the internet. 3 million drivers, 3 million customers every day that they're tracking, just using whatever device they're using to enter into their portal. So that kind of technology, and he says, you know, his problem is what? How do we know who you are? Identity authentication, right? Second one is, how do we know when we have an anomaly? And the last one is, when we have an anomaly, how do we get rid of it as fast as we can so we can keep our company in business? And that's their overarching IT strategy right there. Pretty interesting. Yes, ma'am.
Cardon, it's a Army. So you've talked certainly about the cyber force specifically, but I'm just wondering how the Army is changing the view of cyber as just this dark art that you mentioned, and making it viewed as more of or just part of the standard operations?
Yeah, I think the Army's leading there. I'm a little biased. You know, I came out of Army Cyber Command, but I think we're really doing some great work right there. I think the more that people recognize the protection requirement, a lot of it is education. Like most of you in here have an iPhone. Half of you probably have an iPhone. You know, there's an update that came out last night, 10.2, right? If you didn't upload it, that's okay. The hackers have already been working for 24 hours, reverse engineering that to figure out what it is, to build a weapon, to sell on the dark web to attack you, right? The difference is because Apple works end-to-end, roughly the estimates in Future Crimes book is, 70, 80% of it's patched. The problem is Android phones are 4% patched. Doesn't mean your phone's not patched, but if you're not constantly looking at updates, most of them, if you just read at the bottom, there's the keyword, fixes some bug issues. Yeah, and this goes back to the acquisition side, right? There's a saying by Chris Lynch from the Defense Digital Service, who I've worked a close relationship with, and he gave me this great saying, which I use: code at rest is at risk. Okay, that's a great saying. And then I started thinking, like, wait a minute, how much code is laying around the Army that is never patched? I'm like, oh my gosh, we got to completely rethink the way we do this. So going back to it, I think there's a lot of education, but we're also getting educated by the School of Hard Knocks, right? The Pentagon, the whole hacking incident that happened this year, kind of changed the way things work, right? And so when it happens to you, like Target, it changed the way things work. When if you get a chance to talk to Kevin Mandia from FireEye, you get an intrusion, what happens is the leadership gets involved, right? And then all of a sudden it becomes serious. And they don't put up with this kind of, which company was it? Well, I probably shouldn't name the company, but there are certain companies, they don't allow you, when you get on, you go through the very first thing you do, your cyber training, say, well, what happens if like you do it, we fire you? I go, why? They go, we can't afford it. It's brand. We can't afford to be hacked, right? It's brand. If we get hacked, then people won't trust us and they won't do business with us. And so the companies have started to recognize that a hacking incident causes brand issues. Those brand issues are a lot harder to solve than just fixing your network, right? Because tell me, for a while there, when you went to Target and you pulled out your credit card, you didn't think about whether that was a good idea, or Home Depot, or some of these others. When you pull it out, and that's what they're worried about, because right now, think about how much banking we do online, right? We don't even think about how swiping our cards. But you do think about swiping your card when you know that company was hacked. You're like, maybe I'll use this one I have a $50 limit on, right? Okay, sir.